Hello and welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David concludes the series on Daniel with a look at Daniel's trip to the lion's den. Let's listen.
Well, we're in the final week of our series on the study of Daniel's story. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, wait a second. We haven't done Daniel's most famous story yet, Daniel and the lion's den. And you're absolutely right. Because today, in the final week of Daniel's story, is when we will study that story. Now, I don't have an experience with a pit of lions, but I do have experience with a pit of bears. Allow me to explain. Sarah and I visited the city of Bern in Switzerland this past summer. And legend has it that it was founded in the 1100s because the Duke of that area said, I'm going to go hunting today. And the first animal that I find, I'm going to name the whole city after. Well, he found a bear, and he said, okay, I'm going to name it Bear, which in German was close to Bern. And the bear then became the emblem of the whole city. So as we were walking around, we saw bears everywhere in this little city of Bern, which happens to be now the capital of Switzerland. Now, they leaned so much into this as having a bear as kind of their mascot that in the 1500s, they created bear pits. These were large pits that were right outside the city walls that they put these massive golden bears into the pits. Of course, I took a video so I could show you. Here is one of these bears. Now, these bear pits served two purposes. One, they were a great tourist attraction. And two, they really fended off the city from anyone who was trying to come and conquer them. Because really, would you want to try to make your way through the bear pits to go and conquer Bern? I definitely would not. Now, fun fact, have you ever visited New Bern on the coast of North Carolina? And if you have probably seen these bear emblems all over the place. That's because in the 1700s, people from Bern, Switzerland, they were refugees, they fled, and they came to America and started New Bern, which is why you still see the bears all over New Bern today. All that to say, can you imagine being thrown into a pit of bears, much less a pit of lions? And yet these things happened in ancient times. So today, we're going to study the story of Daniel and how he responds to what must have been one of the scariest and most intense experiences of his entire life. It begins in Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. We are told it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Okay, I bet I know your first question that you have as you're reading this today. It's, what is a satrap? Right? That's a term we're not very familiar with today, and with good reason. A satrap was a type of governor in the Persian Empire. And obviously, we don't live in Persia today, so we would have very little familiarity with what a satrap was. But from the scriptures, we can see that the king, King Darius, appointed 120 of them. Now, most of the time, they would rule over 1 or 2 cities, depending on the city's size or population. And they had many different roles as kind of the governor of the city. But one of the most important roles to the king was to make sure that the king did not suffer loss. Now, what that means, another way to put that, is to make sure they collected taxes from their city and to make sure that all the taxes made its way back to the king. The king does not want to be missing out on any. Now, you might have noticed that Daniel was one of 3 administrators who was put over all of the other satraps. You see, the king has recognized Daniel's wisdom and has chosen him to lead. Now, not only that, but the king has other plans for Daniel as well. Here's the next verse. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Whoa. Okay, so if you were with us last week, you might remember that Daniel had almost faded into obscurity. But now we are told that he is in line to be in charge of the entire kingdom, second only to the king. Now, may I remind you how old Daniel is during this story? He is in his early 80s at this point in the story. Do we have anyone else in this room in their early 80s here today? Because if so, I hope you see yourself in this story. I hope you put yourself in the shoes of Daniel, because that's how old he was when these events happened to him. Now, unfortunately, the same trouble that Daniel got into in Babylon has followed him to Persia. Daniel, he tries to just keep his head down, to serve the king faithfully, but as he does so, he often rises through the ranks. And as he goes up that ladder, the people who he's passing are filled with jealousy and they're filled with anger. Now, the only problem for these people that want to get Daniel is that Daniel was completely above board. They couldn't find anything wrong with his behavior or with his conduct. But they knew that Daniel was a faithful man, so they set a trap for him. Jumping ahead to verse 6, here's what we're told. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. What is with these kings demanding to be worshipped? I mean, my goodness, first it was Nebuchadnezzar with the golden statue, and now here it is with King Darius saying, no one for the next 30 days will pray to anyone except for me. Now, you can see that the king, when given this plan, he offered no objections to it. I think the thought of being worshipped probably appealed to him. And not only that, remember that this kingdom is now at a transition point. They had, in our last story last week, they had just conquered Babylon. And so now they have all these Babylonians within their kingdom. So this is a way of reminding the Babylonians, hey, remember who you serve. It's King Darius, right? King Darius is now in charge of you. He's going to be the one that you now must worship. What would you do? I asked the kids that this morning, and I ask us as adults and teenagers now as well. If you were in Daniel's shoes and this edict got put out that you could not pray to your God, the God you have served for 80 plus years, at the threat of death, what would you do in that moment? As we read the scriptures, we're actually told the first thing that Daniel does upon learning that this edict was put out. The first thing he does is he goes home to pray. Here's the next verse. It says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Okay, I want you to notice Daniel's practice that we observe in this verse. Daniel's habit was to pray 3 times per day. Yes, 3 times a day, he'd go to his room, he would get down on his knees, he would open up his windows, and he would pray. Now, we're not told how long he prayed for. It could have been 5 minutes or 2 hours, but I don't think the length or duration is what matters. I think it was the consistency of 3 times every day, reminding himself that God was here. How often do we go through our days and hours go by and then we go, oh yeah, God exists. And we need to remind ourselves that the presence of God is always here and always surrounding us. Daniel, in his habits, was able to remind himself daily that God was there. It makes me wonder, as we kind of reflect on ourselves here. Are there ways that you can incorporate God more into your daily rhythms, right? Ways that you can actively connect with God when you have an extra 5 minutes here or 10 minutes there. I want you to notice one more thing about the way that Daniel prayed. Daniel prayed in an upstairs room with a window that was looking out towards Jerusalem. Now, that is hugely important, and let me tell you why. There have been several times throughout history that God's people were conquered, and those people were taken out of Jerusalem and placed into exile. So that's what happened to Daniel, right? He was taken out of Jerusalem. He was brought into a foreign country. And the Old Testament, in the book of 1 Kings, gives instructions for how to live if you are one of these people that finds yourself in exile. Specifically, one verse says this. It says, "Pray to you," meaning to God, "toward the land you gave their ancestors, towards the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name." What that's saying is that these exiles should pray towards Jerusalem. They should pray towards that holy city. And in doing so, what they're really praying is that one day God would let them come home, right? It didn't matter what foreign city they found themselves in. From wherever they were supposed to find the direction of Jerusalem and then pray in that direction. Now, remember, Daniel was taken from his home as just a teenager. I mean, think about how he must have longed to go home, right? Imagine how deeply he would have yearned to one day walk through those streets of Jerusalem again, the streets that he grew up in, or just one more time worship in God's holy temple. Daniel, now in his 80s, has been away from his home for decades upon decades, and yet 3 times a day he prays towards his home. He prays to go home. Now, he cannot see Jerusalem from his vantage point in Persia, but he knows the direction. Sometimes in our prayers, we can't see the full picture of what God is doing in our lives, but we know or we sense the direction that God wants us to pray towards, right? Sometimes we sense that God is working in our hearts, that God is doing something within us, and we don't see the full picture yet. We don't completely understand what it is that God is asking us, but we have enough sense to know where we're headed, and we pray in that direction. Now, obviously, the men who set this trap knew that Daniel was a faithful man and knew that he was going to continue to pray to his God. So they catch Daniel in the act, and they go and they tell the king. In verse 13, it says, "Then they said to the king, 'Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day.'" Notice the way that they describe Daniel. He's that exile from Judah, which implies that he's not one of us. He's not a Persian or a Mede. He's not even a Babylonian. He's one of those exiles. Do you think that may have been part of the root cause for their jealousy? The fact that he's an outsider from another country that's being put over them, in charge of them. Regardless of their motivation, they have essentially trapped the king. And the king, his response might surprise you. It says, when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Okay, wait a second. Why is the king distressed? Well, he's distressed because he trusted Daniel. He knew that Daniel had wisdom in him, and he had planned to put Daniel in charge of the whole kingdom. But as I read this, I thought to myself, but he's still king, right? So as king, can't he just change the law? Can't he just choose to pardon Daniel if he wanted to? But he can't. And here's why. So the Persian Empire was vast. It went from about modern-day India all the way over to the Mediterranean. And so if the king were to issue an edict, think about how long it would take for that edict, that message, to spread throughout the whole kingdom. I mean, there's not text. There's not any way to communicate back then other than someone on horseback just going and saying, this is what the king says. This is the king's edict. It would take a long time. So can you imagine if the king said, wait, never mind, here's another edict, and it's different from the one that I just said? Do you think there'd be much confusion going, well, wait, do we listen to the first one or do we listen to the second one? Who do we trust? So the Persians had really trained their people that when the king speaks, you listen, right? That word is unchangeable. No one else will say anything different once you hear the words of the king, not even the king. So in this moment, King Darius realizes he has been tricked. He realizes that this whole thing was a charade, really just to get Daniel. And yet, he is helpless. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. Have you noticed that Daniel has not said a word in this entire chapter? Right? All he has done so far is get down on his knees and pray. And now he is thrown into a pit of lions, which makes me wonder, why on earth are the Persians using pits of lions in the first place? But again, this is a very different time that you have to put yourself into. So lions were the most feared predator in the Near East, and Persia was known as using them as their primary form of execution. So it wasn't the guillotine, it wasn't a firing squad, it was the pit of lions if you deserved capital punishment. I can't imagine what Daniel must have been feeling or what he was thinking as he was being thrown into that pit. I would think he would just be absolutely terrified. Now, to help us imagine this scene, there's a painting. There's a painting from 1872 done by Britton Riviera. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things about this painting. First, notice the colors. The colors are very subdued, aren't they? They're not bright at all. It's what I would imagine a deep, dark den to look like. And notice the lions. Each one of the lions has a different expression on its face. Some are timid or even fearful. One appears to be growling, another cowering. And Daniel just stands there facing the lions, facing his greatest threat, but with his head bowed. Here's how the story ends. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. So Daniel is saved, which teaches us this, that God's power to save is greater than the world's power to destroy. Daniel is saved from the mouths of lions because Daniel serves the living God, the God who is still active back then and is still active today as well. You see, as I read this story, as I reflect on all that has happened, I realize that God can turn your greatest trial into your greatest testimony. And here's what I mean by that. Being thrown into a pit of lions was probably the greatest trial that Daniel had ever faced. And that's saying something, because he faced many, many challenges throughout his life. And yet throughout it all, throughout each and every challenge, Daniel remained faithful to God. And because of that, because of Daniel's faithfulness, we are still talking about Daniel thousands of years later. We are still studying this story together thousands of years later. This story has become his testimony. Yes, through Daniel's bravery and unwavering commitment to God, Daniel still speaks to us today as he encourages us to be brave, as he encourages us to remain unwaveringly committed to God. his greatest challenge, became his greatest testimony. Which makes me wonder, how can you use the challenges of your life to point other people to God? Sometimes when we go through a challenge, we don't want to talk about them. We don't even want to think about them. Perhaps it's too painful to think about, or maybe we consider it shameful or embarrassing for some reason. But Daniel shows us the way that we can take those painful or even scary moments of life and turn them into testimonies about God. I bet if you took some time thinking about those hard moments of your life, those challenges of your life, and then you consider them through the lens of faith, you'll see the ways that God was with you throughout every step of that challenge. You'd be able to understand the way God showed up for you during your trial, and you'd have quite the story to tell. I think the encouragement in the book of Daniel here is to not keep that story to yourself, to share that with those who maybe most need to hear it. So as I've mentioned, this is our very last week studying Daniel. He's now in his early 80s, and you may find yourself wondering, well, what happens next? Right? What happens after the lion's den that we all know about? What happened to Daniel? And I know the question I had when I read this is, did Daniel ever make it home? After being taken from Jerusalem as a teenager, did he ever get to return home before he died? Now, the Bible doesn't tell us directly, but ancient history suggests that Daniel died and was buried in Persia. Yes, as early as the 3rd century, Christians were making pilgrimages to a town called Susa in Persia to what they believed to be the tomb of Daniel, which means that Daniel never made it home. And now at the end of the book of Daniel, Daniel dies. Yes, in chapter 12, what you see, and we won't read the whole thing, I encourage you to go home and read it. But in chapter 12, the very last chapter of Daniel's given a vision. And in that vision, an angel speaks to him. An angel speaks to him about the end of time, right? The end of the world. And Daniel, being human like us, wants to know when that's going to happen. When is God going to finally come and make all things right? And the angel responds in the most gentle and caring way. The angel essentially says, that's not for you to know, Daniel. Your work is done. It's time for you to die and to enter your heavenly rest. Here's the angel's exact words. These are the very last words in the book of Daniel. The angel says to him, as for you, go your way until the end. You will rest. And then at the end of the days, you will rise again to receive the inheritance set aside for you. Going to a place of rest is the biblical way of saying passing away or dying. And so what the angel is telling Daniel, probably sometime in his mid-80s, it is time for Daniel to rest. Right? His work is done. He does not have to persevere or endure any more. He has made it through so many challenges in his life. Now is the time for him to be at peace. And although Daniel never got to return home to Jerusalem in a more spiritual way, Daniel is indeed going home. Yes, and one day, I wonder if you noticed this, that he says, one day, Daniel, you will rise again, which refers to that future resurrection of the dead that has begun in Jesus. Yes, there's an image of Jesus right here in the middle of the Old Testament. Now, as I read Daniel's conclusion, I think to myself, I bet this is not how he expected his life to turn out. Right? As a child, when he dreamed about his future, surely he saw himself growing old in Jerusalem, perhaps starting a family, being able to choose his own career, but life took a different course. And life can do that to us sometimes, can't it? Right? Where we have a vision for what we think is going to happen, or a hope of what will one day be, and then life flips the script and takes us in a different direction. But during these unsettling moments that each and every one of us will go through in this life, Daniel provides the ultimate example for us. He is the example of steady faith, to just keep serving God, wherever you are, in the ups and the downs, those challenges and trials. Just keep trying to live faithfully moment by moment, day by day, until the day that we too will return home. Amen.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.